So, Steve, when something goes wrong in your robot, when something breaks, either a competition or in the last few, hours of building your robot, what procedure does the team follow, or what procedure should it follow?
Definitely not panic. It's really a matter of analyzing what happened, what broke, what happened, what could have gone wrong. I mean, it's fairly obvious if it's a mechanical failure. Well, most of the time. People like to blame software, something didn't work. Then they like to blame electrical because something didn't work and obviously there's a loose connection. Right, so it's just a matter of tracing through it. Is there something obviously broken mechanically? Did you lose a bolt? Did a key come out of the keyway? That's pretty easy to diagnose. And then it comes down to, okay, is there something electrically missing? Do you have signal going to all your speed controllers or spikes or whatever it is? And then you can back down into software. Usually software is the last one. If nothing's changed, then how did something suddenly go wrong? That doesn't mean that can't happen, because if you haven't thoroughly tested your software through driver practice, then that's a good place to start too. But we try and give software as much time with the robot as we can, so that we are very comfortable with that to start with.
Hey, Jerry?
As far as troubleshooting, the number one key I always see is that you got to do things one step at a time. You can't change 17 things and then expect that if you see it's fixed, then obviously you fix the problem. You could have changed so many different things and not have a clue what you just fixed just to make it suddenly magically work. That tends to happen a lot. Just bumping a wire and making it re-plug in could have actually been what solved it, and you just changed all this other stuff, which could cause other problems later. But yeah, just like he said, it's usually you kind of work your way down, try to find the easiest things, look at the easiest things first. We can go with very general analogy: is your robot powered on? That's usually step number one, right? I mean, and you just go from the easiest thing to the hardest thing, and you just step one step at a time.
So one of the things that, go ahead, Steve.
I just wanted to back up that with the one thing we do is, unless there is something obviously mechanically broken, we tend to start with electrical, right? Because that we can isolate and test one thing at a time, like Jerry was saying. And we'll just plug it in, and we'll try it out. We'll enable it, make sure we've got all connections. Try that function, push the button to activate whatever mechanism it is. See how that goes. But before we let mechanical in to try and change things or fix things, we'll start with electrical.
So you guys both sound like, similar strategies. Start with the simplest thing and go to the hardest thing. One of the things we love about this show is that we get all of your personal experiences on it, and so we love to hear stories. I guess do either of you have stories either really good or really bad of teams not following this or following this?
I have a few. I'm just going to pick the best ones. I will say, this is something that happened to us last year at Midwest. We spent all of Thursday and Friday battling with issues with our drive. This is our first regional for the year, and the robot just wasn't behaving right. We'd lose power to one side or not get as much power to one side. So we were tracing through, we were changing our PWM cables, we were changing Victors out. We'd occasionally not get signal, then we'd get signal back. It would happen on different sides of the robot. And then we had Saturday morning one really good match, and we realized we had tied PWM cables down near the sidecar we'd lifted them up instead of down with all the others. And once we sort of wiggled them around a bit, we discovered that actually the PWM connection inside the sidecar was faulty. So after 2 days, we found that we had to switch out the whole sidecar. And when we got it back to the workshop, we took the back off, ran a continuity test, and found that there was actually bad solder connections on particular PWM outputs of the sidecar. So I don't want to say don't trust your gear, but just don't rule out the things that you buy off the shelf when you go troubleshooting either. Be prepared to investigate every option.
Hey, Jerry, do you have any horror stories, as it were, about your robot?
That sidecar, I've heard more horror stories about that sidecar than anything else, to tell you the truth. it is a great piece of equipment when it's working, but it's very hard to tell that it's not working. But yeah, I've heard many teams with that one 2-3 day issue. I did have one rookie team that I was helping last year at an event that when they were in the pits, everything would work fine. Their communication was fine. Drivers, the wheels would turn fine. The driver was working fine. And this kind of goes back to driver training as well, because when we got out to the field, when we started finally after 2 days, what we'd realize is during competition matches, the driver would floor it as fast as he could. And the carpet, along with them trying to turn and flooring it so fast, was actually tripping his Jaguars because they didn't set up the gearboxes with a support. So his gearboxes were torquing, making that chain tighten even more, and then everything was overloading the Jaguars, and the Jaguars would start flashing red. And it took 2.5 days to diagnose that problem, and it was very disheartening to see that it was such a simple issue that we didn't catch, that nobody was able to help figure out until the very end. But it can be simple things, and that was a mechanical one that would just nobody noticed until the very end.
Right.
Okay.
I guess another one I see a lot helping teams is poor electrical connections where they've crimped and soldered, and they've cut through wires. So you have a 10-gauge wire and half of it's cut, so you're not getting the full voltage through or the power through that you'd expect. And equally and more so for the battery leads. So where they've put the connectors on the battery leads to bolt onto the battery, and half of it's missing. Half it's cut through. It might be hanging on by one strand of copper wire. And it's not necessarily rookie teams, but this is something that's, apart from very dangerous with the battery leads, it's not going to give your robot good performance, and you can end up with power dips and all kinds of things because you can't draw the current that you need when you start running, and you lose power. So that's one thing I'd really encourage teams to look at, is their battery connections very, very closely.